teacher
discussions.
if there's anyone.
I'm glad to finally meet you. You certainly are keeping me busy with your tweets. I'm sorry you find me offensive.
I don't find it offensive. I just take issue with a lot of your perspectives. You mentioned school governing councils as an alternative local governing body which would ideally consist of democratically elected positions, although you weren't clear about what they would actually look like. You were very clear that there should be appointed...
No more than 12. Well, I'll give you the answer. Research suggests no more than 12 for legitimate governance responsibility. Any bigger than that, and you're ending up got a bunch of delegates that start talking about things. I would go with 7. I would go with principal. I'm actually in favor of principal and parent co-chairs, shared leadership. That puts me a bit at odds with people, and I think that's worth a try on the outset.
Are you aware that the current SAC model has a parent chair?
Yes, I know that. But I think in the new regime of things, I think we should be modeling collaboration. I would. It's funny.
So
no
a
principal
chair,
of this.
a principal chair, an appointed
No,
business interest, an appointed education panelist.
Just look at the library boards. So I'm very familiar with the library boards. And I learned a huge lesson last year because I went to all 9. I presented to them, and none of them are elected. They're all appointed by the municipalities or by the province. And one thing I learned was there's an advantage to having municipal representatives. If schools are being closed, if there are things, would it be the municipal planner? We need to work hard at getting the right people on those governing councils. I think a business employer is one. And I'm in favor of a post-secondary school representative for a community college or a university who can bring that perspective. And in other words, broaden it out. Now, of course, within the parent
So that
community,
leaves 3 members.
well, look, if it's going to be 13 or 14, I don't really care.
No, you're. I'm asking you what your recommended model is. You're saying 7, so there'd be a principal could not be elected because the principal is an employee of the school. So there would be an election for the parent co-chair under your proposed model, and then the
I
3.
think principal would be maybe ex officio, but there'd be a partnership, right?
So there would be elections for 4.
I haven't thought it through. Don't hold me to this. Right? I've got like 4 or 5 different models that I've looked at. And if I was asked, I would say, okay, here if the number is 12, here's the formula.
I'm not
The
trying to
number's
put words in your
14.
mouth. I'm just trying
Majority
to
of
clarify
parents.
so I can scrutinize
Majority
the
of
model and
parents.
determine how I think about it.
Majority of parents elected, and a minority of appointees representing the party.
So these 3 remaining seats would be parent.
Now, within the parent community, I'm also in favor of maybe diversity criteria to see if we can.
So under your recommendation, there would be no place for school staff.
One.
But only a principal. There would be no space for a teacher perspective on that governing council.
I'd actually. By the way, I've worked on boards. I've been on boards, and I've headed schools where there were 2 teachers. I never found a problem. So look, we're talking about what's optimal. You don't want it to get too large. If it went to 15,
Again, I'm not arguing your numbers. I'm just trying to get a clear picture of what your vision is.
majority of parents with a parent chair
So
and shared leadership.
you warn against principals co-opting this process.
Oh, that's what's happened everywhere. That's what's happened everywhere.
My other concern is
Even teachers have told me that were serving on in other schools. They've told me that, my God, there's this, and you know what? That's, by the way, the research on this is that you have to kind of work with principals. They have unlearned certain ways of dealing with parents. Debbie Pashore, her research on engagement. Debbie Pashore. It was in Education Canada, the last issue. Debbie's about, she's got the right idea of you work with parents and guide them and channel them, but you don't manage them.
But I can say nothing.
These are skills we're talking about, you know.
And what they compared to them was the.
Anyway, you have concerns about principals co-opting this process. I'm asking how.
They have done it everywhere.
Yeah, how do you envision these school governing councils not being co-opted by parents who have the resources, time, and pre-existing relationships both with the schools and existing power structures, at the expense of parents who are equally loving and dedicated but do not know how to engage in this process or have the time to work within the system?
It's a risk.
But what it did.
It's a risk.
It skimmed it off.
So how do you mitigate that risk? If one of your major criticisms of the current
How
model,
would you make it?
well, it's your paper, I'm asking you.
It's not so much that they broke up the groups. I think the problem is that why is it?
I think the rules, the governance rules and procedures have to be such. You know, what I've learned in looking at these school governing councils around the world is it has to be, you have to spend a lot of time, this is why I'm nervous about what's happening here. You have to spend a lot of time developing the ground rules to limit that kind of unwanted and intrusive involvement. Like the policy level and the operations level. You're expecting a lot. This is why I don't think what's happening now is going to work. What I suggest is what the government is doing is going to lead to what you're fearing, because they haven't thought it through. I'm in favor of setting a governance model and
But you don't appear to have a clear roadmap to this either.
No, I've got 2 or 3 versions.
Well, this one that you proposed today, I had to ask several supplementary questions to even get you to clarify it.
Talking about a large.
I'm still working through it.
Succeeding.
I've
So
got,
there's a variety of
you know, if you
So
look at
how is your unformed, lacking clarity model better than the unformed, lacking clarity model put forward by the
I put,
government?
I'd say 12, 7, and then there's, and 15, it would be 8 parents. And then the others are negotiated with the communities till we figure it out. I actually, you know, my report says we need to take another 2 years to develop a model that works. So I'm in favor of taking the time to get it right.
If there are going to be elections for
I actually
these,
didn't favor abolishing, but you know this, I didn't. I actually favored setting this model up over the next 2 years and then phasing the boards out. You know that. Okay? If you read the report. Because the report recommended that we, for 2 years, you and me and others, figure this out and get a model that works. Train the principals and them, and then phase out the boards. Here's another thing. Why are we paying the board members till 2020? Wait, they should have finished out their terms. I don't know. Right? You probably agree with me.
I'm just curious.
You know
about-
what, we would have been better to have spent 2 years working through some of these concepts. We'd start with a board, with you and me, and we say, look, if I had my druthers, if it was 12, this is the formula, and so on. And then you know what would happen? Is you get various other ideas. So the result might be something that looks a little different. 12 or 15 would be, don't go over 15. That's all.
So
But it's
you
just my recommendation based on research. That's all.
were very vocal,
The elementary level
you know,
is
about,
different from the junior.
current elected school board governance, 50% voter turnout.
8 reasons they deserve to disappear.
I'm aware of that,
But
but
they should.
the magic number here is you're saying 15% of voters elected people in current board positions.
Oh, yeah, but I'm in favor of school advisory councils.
What's the voter turnout in Edmonton for these school governing councils?
Well, there's a vote across the school. So if there are 300 students,
Yeah, but what's the voter
there's
turnout rate?
300 votes, right?
Right, but how many of those people cast a vote to determine these positions?
The highest number of medals, right?
When they started, I think it was higher than it is now.
So when it started, what was the voter
I
turnout?
don't know, but I will look it up.
Much bigger country population.
Okay.
But I do know this, I do know this.
Tweet us when you get it.
The 7,
They don't even.
let's just say, those 7, if it's 12, there'd be a majority of parents, that's the only thing only guideline I have. They would have to be all elected by vote, by secret ballot, by all parents in the school, right? So,
How would you ensure that every parent in the school would cast a ballot?
well, I'm not, I wouldn't force it on
We
them.
don't even have that regulation for a provincial or federal election in Nova Scotia.
you're splitting hairs.
And
We give them that.
I'm not actually.
I'm actually curious about that question too. I mean, how or is it just a matter
What
of
percentage do you
getting-
think would turn out in your school?
By what force of legislation could you compel every parent to cast a ballot for a school governing council member?
I think you'd be using moral persuasion.
Moral persuasion?
Moral
Oh,
persuasion.
absolutely.
You are a parent in this school, and I think with the support of the teachers, teachers encouraging parents to participate, we could get them.
But teachers aren't allowed to have a presence on this.
They encourage the parents to take an interest in school governance.
So teachers that can currently sit on a school advisory council would see their role completely cut out, and they're supposed to support a model that they have no agency in?
Make a fair point.
But there is a.
See, that's why I'm interested in discussing it. I mean, I could see one teacher on that.
I'd be fascinated to know the lack of an answer to the question of what the voter turnout is for school governing councils in Edmonton.
Well, you
If
know
that
what?
number
Let's
is
find
not
that out.
if that number is not substantively higher,
I think we should be able to find that out. You could find it out. I'd like to know that.
but it would seem to me, you having done all this research, that should be somewhere in the documentation you already have on hand.
I'm spread out very thin. I do the best I can.
Okay.
And I'm just being honest with you.
I'm extremely concerned about the elimination of diversity voices on our elected boards for African Nova Scotian and Mi'kmaq
And you
learners.
don't think the executive directors for those are good enough? No. Because I'm actually would be in favor of making sure at the school level
I
those
mean, I know
voices were
my colleagues in the Black Educators Association are terrified about the enormous pressure on somebody who is appointed to represent the diversity of black voices in Nova Scotia for one seat.
In fact, there's an emergency meeting on Monday evening, maybe you've heard of it, at the North Branch Library for Black Educators, organized by the BEA. If you would like to hear the concerns of Black educators.
So
When is it, Monday?
Monday evening at the North Branch Library, I can't remember the time, 6 to 8:30?
6
Yeah.
to 8:30, I think.
Yeah, I'm very interested in that because, as you know, I've written about this, and I am concerned. There's different ways of looking at how you get meaningful representation. And there's a lot of cynicism. I am a little bit surprised that Avis wasn't more attentive to it. She certainly is a very black Canadian. I'm a little bit surprised, just between you and me. I thought she would have been a little more sensitive to the importance of doing maybe a little bit better. I think, things are, you make mistakes. I know, like for example, just between you and me, I didn't have any more than 25 minutes with her. But I did say, phase the school boards out and develop school-based management now. She didn't do it. So what you saw was kind of what I presented. I've been pretty consistent, and I support the legislation because I really thought we needed to clean house with the boards and start something new. That's all.
All I'm saying is I don't think absentee.
I had one other question unrelated to this, but you
I'm really glad that we're talking.
You seem to suggest that the only place and time where board business is conducted is at school board meetings.
No, that's not true.
That does tend to be.
But when you presented, the only time that you indicated that boards actually, elected board members do any business is at meetings. That aside from those meetings, the clear insinuation of the room was that elected board members have no meaningful function in school governance aside from attending and presiding over board meetings.
Missed the most classes of any student.
You didn't present any information about their role in advocating
For 9 years, I was a trustee. I'm proud to say.
in Nova Scotia or
No, in
Ontario.
Ontario. I was elected 3 times. But
So have you ever been a member of a school board here in Nova Scotia?
no, but I have visited and attended more school board meetings than anyone else in the field. I can assure you that, other than those that work there. But I'll say this.
The other thing I put my kids in.
Then I do,
the care was,
board governance. I'll say this.
we used to have, and of course now I can't think of the name of it.
I went to
but
every
we had
school
a
advisory,
program where at
school
lunchtime,
advisory
they
committee
would go in
meeting.
and they would learn about
I,
science.
Here in Nova Scotia?
And this
No, when I
government
did it,
center would come into the school.
For which school?
Yeah, it was great. I paid
no,
like
I'm
40 or
talking
50
about
bucks
when
or
I
something.
was in the role.
Yeah, it was nothing.
I've written
And
a
they
lot
would come
about
in,
this. I wrote my first paper on
No,
this
I'm just
in
trying to clarify, so
1993.
you're talking about you were a trustee in Ontario, and you
I'm in
attended school.
favor of the trustee system, not the board, school board.
That's great.
their
Member
love
system.
of science.
Okay.
you know.
I'm not arguing, I'm trying to nail down the details of your participation.
Is that
So you were a trustee in Ontario, and you attended school advisory committee meetings in Ontario.
In other words,
You have not been a board member here, and you have not attended school advisory council meetings in Nova Scotia.
I have.
In which schools did you attend meetings from?
the school boards and the teachers should be looking at and going, let's emulate this.
If I
Einstein
asked
This
you-
is not an ad hominem question, it's a
If I
fact
asked
question.
you who you are,
And then we'll spur on.
where you were educated, I couldn't care less. I'm just talking about policy issues.
You know, I get that.
But how you are informed on those policy issues is of substance to people who wonder where your position comes from. So if you,
40 years, 3 provinces, every role in education except chairing a board.
so
And from teacher,
So what they do
public
is at
school,
lunchtime,
right through, taught grade 7 to graduate school.
yeah, like, I mean, it's.
And I taught every year that I was a principal, you probably know that, and
So the
I'm
kids
proud
that
of it.
were in the.
I think one of the issues that comes up is that I feel like sometimes you've been cagey when you were asked the question directly about when was the last time that you taught in a public school in Nova Scotia or anywhere else. You've dodged the question.
2009 was my last class.
That's delivering amazing results.
I taught at the grammar school, I taught grade
And let's
10.
bring that into the classroom.
And I wrote about it. I wrote
Yep.
about it in
I'm aware of
a
the book.
blog post, you probably, where I
And-
demonstrated boredom.
And in public school, when was the last time? Because before that was
York
Lower
Regional
Canada
Board,
College, I
in the early
believe.
90s.
Would be
They're integrated.
the
Ballpark is fine.
79,
You're
80.
probably not pronunciation, you'd be adding more.
And that's in the York Regional Board?
Speak 3 languages,
Right.
technically 4, but.
And I was declared surplus.
Well, and the point is, if that's, if that's okay, you're
But
proud of
wait,
your,
hold on.
you're proud of
Hold
your
on.
experience in education.
But for 9 years, I was elected with 20,000 people in the York Region Public Board of Education. I worked very closely with the teachers, and I was actually on the student council committee. And I visited schools all over York Region, from Steeles up to Lake Simcoe. I was elected in 1988, and I finished in 1997. So for almost 9 years, I represented 20,000 people. I represented my own high school. And,
Okay.
yeah,
So
and
that's
I-
your experience in Ontario. I'm just trying to clarify, since 1997, which is 20 years, in Nova Scotia, you've never been an elected member of a school board.
No.
And you said that you've attended many SAC meetings in Nova Scotia. And my question is,
I've-
which schools have you attended SAC meetings
English
for?
and some of the ones around where I live. Okay, I've been at their meetings when they've had public meetings. Okay, so parent-teacher meetings.
Parent-teacher meetings are not SAC meetings.
Okay.
Those are
I've talked
parent-teacher
to I've talked
interviews.
to 20 or 30 different chairs who told me all about
So
them. So
you either can't or you won't give me names of schools where you've attended SAC meetings?
no.
It's really not hard for them
Okay.
to
So you
develop
won't or you can't?
a
Can't.
10-week,
Okay.
bunch of sessions and pull it the dog and bone show.
But
Because we can all do that.
you know what's interesting is
The question is,
but-
why aren't we
the
doing
People
that?
for
Because of
Education
money. We
report
don't have the resources. They don't have
on
the resources
So
to
maybe
do
what
it.
we should do
you know
is sit
the
down
school
with
advisory
parents.
councils in Ontario.
Like, so for
It's got a
example,
very
IPs
clear
and
critique.
program,
Yeah.
As well as, and I'm not.
Everything I've heard talking to
well,
people is very
But you know
consistent.
what?
there.
You-
But I